The cruelest invitations are the ones wrapped in a smile. The envelope arrived on a Thursday afternoon, tucked between grocery flyers and overdue notices inside a dented metal mailbox at the downtown shelter. Ava Brooks almost missed it. The cream-colored paper looked out of place among the gray routine of her life, too elegant, too deliberate. She stood beneath the humming fluorescent light in the hallway and turned it over in her hands. The return address was printed in gold lettering. Ryan Whitmore. For a moment, the noise around her faded. The distant television in the common room. The rattling wheels of a janitor's cart. The low conversations drifting through the building. Everything seemed to pull away as she stared at the name she had spent 3 years teaching herself not to think about. Slowly, she opened the envelope. Inside was a wedding invitation thick enough to feel expensive. The paper carried the faint scent of cologne and fresh ink. Ryan Whitmore and Madison Clark request the honor of your presence. Ava read the line twice. Then a third time. Beneath the formal wording was a handwritten note. Used one sentence. Hope life has been kind to you. Anyone else might have mistaken it for courtesy. Ava knew better. Ryan had always preferred polished cruelty over obvious cruelty. He liked his insults dressed as kindness. She folded the card carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Her expression never changed. Across the hallway, a woman carrying laundry smiled and asked if everything was okay. Ava answered with a quiet nod. Just mail. The woman continued on her way. Ava remained standing there another moment. The shelter window beside her reflected a tired woman in a second-hand coat. 38 years old. Black. Alone. The world looking at her would see failure. They would see the woman whose husband left her. The woman who lost her apartment. The woman sleeping in a shelter 2 blocks from the river. They would never see the years she spent helping build Ryan's career. They would never see the nights she worked double shifts while he studied. They would never see the sacrifices hidden behind his success. Success had a way of rewriting history. By evening, rain tapped softly against the shelter windows. Ava sat at a small table near the back of the cafeteria with a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The invitation rested unopened beside her tray. Around here, people worried about tomorrow's job interviews, bus schedules, and finding enough money for prescriptions. Normal struggles. Real struggles. Yet somehow that envelope felt heavier than all of them. Ryan's wedding would take place at the Grand Lexington Hotel, one of the most expensive venues in the city. Ava knew the ballroom. Years ago, she and Ryan had attended a charity gala there when his business was finally beginning to attract investors. Back then he had squeezed her hand beneath crystal chandeliers and whispered that they were building a future together. Now another woman would stand where Ava once imagined herself standing. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere beyond the skyline. Ava looked down at the invitation one final time before sliding it into her bag. She did not throw it away. She did not tear it apart. She simply carried it with her as she rose from the table and walked toward the elevators. Somewhere across the city, Ryan Whitmore was probably finalizing seating charts and champagne selections, convinced every detail of his perfect wedding was under control. What he did not know was that the invitation he mailed to humiliate a forgotten woman had already started something he could neither predict nor stop. The next morning arrived wrapped in cold gray clouds that hung low over the city skyline. Ava Brooks woke before sunrise, long before most of the women in the shelter stirred beneath thin blankets and muted exhaustion. For a few seconds she remained still on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling tiles above her. Then her eyes drifted toward the chair beside her bed where the cream-colored envelope rested neatly on top of her folded coat. It was strange how a single piece of paper could make an entire room feel different. The shelter followed the same routine it always had. The coffee machine rattled awake at 6 o'clock. Volunteers arranged breakfast trays beneath fluorescent lights. Someone laughed in the hallway. Someone else argued with a vending machine. Life moved forward exactly as it had yesterday. Yet Eva could feel the invitation sitting there like an unopened door to a part of her life she thought had finally disappeared. She joined the breakfast line carrying a plastic tray. Oatmeal. Toast. Black coffee. Nothing especial. Across from her sat Denise, a retired school bus driver who had become one of the few people Eva occasionally talked to. Denise noticed the envelope peeking from Eva's bag almost immediately. "That looks fancy," she said. Eva glanced down. "It is." Denise smiled. "Good news?" Eva took a sip of coffee before answering. "Depends on who is reading it." Denise laughed softly, assuming it was a joke. Eva let her believe that. After breakfast, Eva left for work. 3 mornings each week she cleaned offices in a downtown business building. The pay was modest, but it was steady. By 7:30 she was pushing a supply cart through silent hallways lined with glass walls and framed awards. Some mornings she found herself studying the names on executive doors. Men and women who managed companies worth millions. People who probably never worried about bus schedules or shelter curfews. As she polished a conference table overlooking the river, her reflection appeared faintly in the glass. For a moment another image overlapped with it. A younger Eva. Confident. Hopeful. Standing beside Ryan at networking events where investors shook his hand and praised his ambition. Back then she had believed they were climbing together. Looking back now felt like watching a movie where she already knew the ending. Around noon, her shift ended. She stepped outside into the crisp autumn air and sat alone on a bench facing the street. Cars rolled past. Business professionals hurried by carrying briefcases and coffee cups. Nobody looked twice at her. Nobody recognized her name. Nobody knew she had once been married to one of the city's rising entrepreneurs. Success had made Ryan visible. Failure had made Eva invisible. Yet as she sat there, she realized something that surprised even her. The invisibility no longer hurt the way it once had. It simply existed. Her phone. Buzzed with a calendar reminder from the shelter about an upcoming housing assistance meeting. She silenced it and reached into her bag. The wedding invitation was still there. Uncreative. Untouched. Her fingers brushed the edge of the envelope before she returned it to the bag. Across town, preparations for Ryan Whitmore's wedding continued beneath crystal chandeliers and expensive floral arrangements. Guest lists were finalized. Tables were assigned. Photographers reviewed schedules. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. What Ryan could not see was that the woman he believed the world had forgotten was quietly moving toward a decision of her own, and somewhere beyond the reach of both of them, forces neither could yet understand were already beginning to shift. 3 days before the wedding, the city was wrapped in a steady drizzle that painted the sidewalks silver beneath the streetlights. Eva returned to the shelter later than usual after picking up an extra cleaning shift. Her feet ached. Her shoulders felt heavy. Yet the moment she entered the lobby, she sensed something different. The volunteer at the front desk glanced up from her computer. "Eva, there is something for you." Eva slowed her steps. Packages rarely arrived for anyone there. The volunteer reached beneath the counter and handed her a plain white envelope. No logo. No return address. No stamp. Used her name typed neatly across the front. Eva stared at it for a moment. "Who dropped this off?" she asked. The volunteer shrugged. "A man in a dark coat." It did not leave a name. Eva thanked her and headed upstairs. Rain tapped softly against the shelter windows as she sat alone on the edge of her bed. Around her, conversations drifted through the room. Someone was talking about a job interview. Someone else was planning a visit with family. Normal lives continuing in small ways. Eva turned the envelope over in her hands. It felt unusually thick. Finally, she opened it. Inside it was a single sheet of paper. Nothing more. No lettered. No signature. Used 6 words printed in clean black ink. Attend the wedding. She read the sentence twice. Then a third time. There was no explanation. No clue. About who had sent it. No indication of what. Only those 3 words staring back at her. Attend the wedding. Ava lowered the paper slowly. The room suddenly felt quieter. Not because the noise had disappeared, but because her attention had narrowed around a question she could not answer. The wedding invitation from Ryan still rested inside her bag. Now there was this. Another message. Another push toward the same destination. Coincidence felt too simple. Across the room, Denise was reading a magazine beneath a lamp. Ava considered showing her the note. Instead, she folded the paper and slipped it back into the envelope. So many things sounded stranger when spoken aloud. That night's sleep came slowly. Long after the shelter lights dimmed, Eva remained awake staring toward the dark outline of the ceiling. Memories drifted through her mind like reflections on water. Ryan celebrating business deals. Ryan promising forever. Ryan assuring her they were building something that would last. Then the later memories. The colder ones. The distance. The silence. The day she realized she had become a footnote in a story she helped write. Outside, a siren echoed somewhere downtown before fading into the distance. Ava turned onto her side. The anonymous note rested on the nightstand beside her bed. Attend the wedding. Whoever sent it knew exactly where she lived. They knew about the wedding. More importantly, they seemed to care whether she showed up. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it stirred something she had not felt in a long time. Curiosity. The next afternoon, during her lunch break, Eva sat on the same bench overlooking the busy street. The anonymous envelope was tucked inside her coat pocket. People moved past carrying umbrellas and briefcases while buses hissed to a stop at crowded corners. Life continued with its usual urgency. Yet for the first time since receiving Ryan's invitation, Eva found herself looking beyond the humiliation she expected. There was now another question layered beneath it. Who wanted her there so badly that they sent a message without revealing their name? Several blocks away, hidden behind glass towers and private offices, a decision made years earlier was quietly moving toward the moment it had been waiting for. Ava could not see it yet. She could not understand the connection. All she knew was that 2 separate invitations were now pointing her toward the same wedding, and somewhere deep inside, she was beginning to suspect that the event Ryan believed he controlled might not belong entirely to him. Years before anyone whispered Ryan Whitmore's name in boardrooms or printed it in business magazines, there had been a winter storm that covered half the state in ice and silence. Ava thought about that night unexpectedly while riding a city bus home from work. The memory arrived without warning, triggered by the sight of snow beginning to collect along the edges of downtown sidewalks. She watched the white flakes drift beyond the window and suddenly found herself remembering a version of life that felt very far away. Back then she was still married. Money was tight. Ryan was trying to launch his first company from a cramped apartment filled with borrowed furniture and unpaid bills. Most evenings Eva worked extra hours while Ryan chased opportunities that always seemed one step away. It was not an easy life, but it was honest. During that winter storm, roads closed across several counties. Temperatures dropped below 20 degrees. Power failures spread through neighborhoods outside the city. Ava had been driving home after a late shift when she spotted a disabled vehicle sitting near the shoulder of a deserted highway. Headlights glowed weakly through blowing snow. Most drivers continued past without stopping. The weather made it dangerous. Ava almost kept driving too. Then she noticed movement inside the vehicle. She pulled over. The cold air struck her face the moment she stepped outside. Inside the stranded sport utility vehicle sat an older woman and a teenage boy wrapped in coats. The engine had failed. Their phones had lost signal. They had been waiting for help for nearly 2 hours. Ava never asked who they were. She never asked what they did for a living. She simply invited them into her car, turned the heater on, and drove them nearly 40 miles to a small roadside motel. That still had electricity. The woman offered money. Ava refused. The boy thanked her repeatedly. Ava smiled and told him that someday he should help someone else instead. Then she drove away and never expected to see either of them again. The memory faded as the bus approached her stop. Ava stepped onto the sidewalk and adjusted her coat against the cold wind. She had not thought about that storm in years. To her, it had always been one of those small moments people forget. A simple act of kindness. Nothing more. Meanwhile, in a private office overlooking the city skyline, a silver-framed photograph rested on a bookshelf near floor-to-ceiling windows. The photograph showed a younger woman standing beside an older woman and a teenage boy outside a roadside motel during a snowstorm. Time had slightly faded the colors, but not the memory. A man in his mid-40s stood near the window studying financial reports displayed across multiple screens. His name was Nathan Caldwell, one of the most respected business leaders in the country. His schedule was packed with meetings, acquisitions, and charitable foundations. Yet every year, without fail, he paused on the anniversary of that winter storm. Every year he remembered the stranger who stopped when nobody else did. His mother still spoke about her. The woman who asked for nothing. The woman who disappeared before they could properly thank her. Nathan glanced briefly toward the photograph before returning his attention to the reports on his desk. Nearby sat a folder containing documents prepared months earlier. A process already set in motion. A promise years in the making. Across the city, Eva climbed the shelter steps carrying groceries she had purchased with careful budgeting and long hours of work. She had no idea that a forgotten act of kindness from years ago was quietly moving back into her life. She had no idea that the anonymous message, the approaching wedding, and a promise made during a snowstorm were all connected by threads she could not yet see. But the distance between the past and the present was becoming smaller with every passing day. 2 days before the wedding, Ryan Whitmore stood beneath a chandelier worth more than many people earned in a year and studied the ballroom that would soon host hundreds of guests. Workers adjusted floral arrangements. Event coordinators checked schedules. Crystal glassware reflected warm golden light across polished tables. Everything looked perfect, and that was exactly how Ryan wanted it. He had spent months building this day into a statement. Not just a wedding. A declaration. A public display of how far he had come. Madison Clark walked beside him, holding a tablet filled with seating charts and guest confirmations. She stopped near the center aisle and smiled. Looks like almost everyone is coming. Ryan nodded. Good. His attention drifted toward one particular name on the guest list. Ava Brooks. He did not mention it immediately. Instead, he adjusted the cuff of his tailored suit and watched workers prepare the stage where he would exchange vows. Madison noticed the pause. Do you really think she will show up? Ryan allowed himself a small smile. Curiosity is powerful. Madison laughed softly. If I were her, I would stay home. Ryan looked toward the ballroom entrance. That is exactly why I think she will come. Neither of them discussed what sat beneath the invitation. Neither openly admitted the satisfaction they expected from seeing Eva walk into a room filled with successful people who remembered her from a different life. Some victories, Ryan believed, were more enjoyable when witnessed by the people who lost. Later that afternoon, a private lunch brought together several business associates, investors, and longtime supporters. Conversation flowed easily between discussions of market trends and wedding plans. At one point, a guest asked whether Ryan had remained in contact with his former wife. Ryan lifted his glass and answered with practiced ease. Life takes people in different directions. The table responded with polite laughter and knowing smiles. Nobody challenged the statement. Nobody asked what those different directions had actually cost. Across the city, Eva sat alone in a public library near the shelter. Rain streaked across tall windows while people worked quietly at nearby tables. In front of her rested the wedding invitation and the anonymous note. 2 separate messages. 2 separate reasons pointing toward the same place. For nearly an hour she stared at them without moving. Finally, she folded both papers and slipped them into her purse. Her decision had arrived quietly. Not with anger. Not with excitement. Simply with certainty. She was going. Not because of Ryan. Not because of curiosity. And not because she expected anything good to happen. She was going because she was tired of allowing old wounds to dictate where she could and could not stand. That evening, as city lights reflected across wet streets, Eva stopped outside a small thrift store she passed almost every week. In the display window hung a navy blue dress. Simple. Elegant. Nothing extravagant. She studied it for several seconds before walking inside. The elderly cashier greeted her with a warm smile. 20 minutes later, Eva left carrying a garment bag that cost less than a restaurant dinner but felt strangely significant. Meanwhile, high above the city, Nathan Caldwell reviewed a final report delivered to his office. The document confirmed that every arrangement had been completed exactly as planned. He closed the folder and looked toward the skyline fading into evening. Years earlier, a stranger had offered kindness during one of the worst nights his family had ever experienced. In less than 48 hours, that kindness would finally return to its source. And while Ryan continued preparing a celebration he believed revolved around him, events already moving beneath the surface were quietly transforming the wedding into something entirely different. Wedding day arrived beneath a clear autumn sky washed in pale gold sunlight. The city seemed unusually calm, as if holding its breath before something important. Ava woke before dawn. For several minutes she remained seated on the edge of her bed, listening to the quiet rhythm of the shelter before the morning routine began. Around her, most of the room was still asleep. A few distant sounds echoed through the hallway. A door closing softly. Running water from a bathroom sink. The low hum of heating vents preparing for another cool day. On the chair beside her bed hung the navy blue dress she had purchased 2 days earlier. Simple. Clean. Elegant without trying to impress anyone. Ava looked at it for a long moment. Then she stood and began getting ready. There was no excitement in her movements. No nervous rush. Only calm. The kind of calm that comes when a decision has already been made. By 8 o'clock she was walking through downtown streets carrying a small handbag and wearing the dress beneath a tailored coat borrowed from Denise. The older woman had insisted. A beautiful dress deserves a beautiful coat, she had said the night before. Ava smiled remembering it. So many people gave support through money. Others gave it through kindness. Both mattered. The Grand Lexington Hotel rose above the avenue like something carved from another world. Polished stone. Glass entrances. Ballast standing beneath elegant awnings. Luxury lived in every detail. Ava slowed slightly as she approached the building. Years ago she had entered these doors beside Ryan. Back then people greeted them as a couple. Partners. A team. Today she arrived alone. Yet strangely, she felt lighter than she had expected. Inside the hotel, wedding staff moved with practiced efficiency. Guests filled the lobby wearing designer suits and expensive dresses. Conversations floated through the air alongside the soft notes of piano music. Several people glanced toward Eva as she crossed the marble floor. Some recognized her immediately. Others took a second look before memory returned. Expressions shifted. Surprise. Curiosity. Unspoken questions. Ava ignored them all. She checked her coat and accepted directions toward the ballroom. No explanations. No apologies. No hesitation. Meanwhile, several floors above, Ryan stood inside a private suite overlooking the city skyline. A group of friends surrounded him while photographers documented every stage of the morning. Laughter filled the room. Champagne glasses reflected sunlight. Ryan appeared relaxed, confident, exactly as everyone expected. One friend mentioned that guests had already begun arriving. Another joked about whether any unexpected visitors might appear. Ryan smiled. Everybody loves a good reunion. The room responded with laughter. It did not elaborate. It did not need to. The anticipation itself seemed enough. Back downstairs, Eva paused outside the ballroom entrance. Beyond the closed doors she could hear music, conversation, and the low energy of hundreds of people gathering together. Her reflection appeared briefly in a polished brass panel beside the entrance. The same woman. The same face. Yet not the same person who had walked away from her marriage years ago. She reached into her handbag and felt the folded anonymous note still resting there. Attend the wedding. Those words had followed her all week. Now she was finally here. Before she could think further, a hotel employee approached carrying a small envelope. Ms. Brooks. Ava turned. Yes. The employee offered the envelope with a polite smile. This was left for you with instructions to deliver it upon arrival. Ava accepted it slowly. No return address. No name. Her pulse quickened for the first time that morning. Around here, guests continued moving toward the ballroom, completely unaware that the quiet chain of events set in motion years earlier was approaching its first visible moment. The envelope felt surprisingly light in Ava's hands. Standing near the ballroom entrance, she carefully opened it while guests continued flowing around her. Inside was a single card no larger than a postcard. On the front, printed in elegant black lettering, were 7 words. Please remain until the final announcement. Ava stared at the message. There was no signature. No explanation. Used another instruction from the same invisible source that had guided her here. Before she could think further, the ballroom doors opened. Warm light spilled across the hallway. Music drifted outward. The ceremony was about to begin. Ava slipped the card into her handbag and stepped inside. Crystal chandeliers stretched across the ceiling like frozen constellations. Hundreds of guests filled rows of polished chairs facing an elevated stage decorated with white roses and gold accents. Conversation softened as people settled into their seats. Several heads turned when Eva entered. Recognition moved quietly through the room. Some guests whispered behind polite smiles. Others exchanged curious glances. A few remembered her immediately. Rajan's former wife. The woman who seemed to vanish after the divorce. Eva felt their attention but refused to carry it. She selected a seat near the back and sat calmly with her hands folded in her lap. The ceremony unfolded exactly as planned. Madison appeared radiant beneath the soft lighting. Rajan stood confidently at the front of the room. Every camera angle seemed designed to celebrate success. Applause followed the vows. More applause followed the kiss. Then guests transitioned into the reception ballroom where champagne flowed and a live band filled the air with music. Ava remained mostly unnoticed at first. That changed the moment Ryan saw her. Across the room, his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Satisfaction flickered behind his smile. He had expected her to come. Seeing her there confirmed something he clearly enjoyed. Throughout the evening, several guests approached Eva. Most offered polite greetings. Some asked how she had been. Others disguised curiosity as concern. Ava answered with quiet grace. She never complained. Never explained. Never defended herself. Her calm seemed to disappoint people hoping for a more dramatic story. Hours passed. Dinner was served beneath golden light. Glasses clinked. Laughter echoed from table to table. Finally, Ryan stood to deliver a speech. The room settled into silence. He thanked family members, investors, friends, mentors. The usual names. Then, midway through the speech, his gaze drifted toward the back of the ballroom. Thou wert Ava. Life is funny sometimes, he said with a smile. A few guests chuckled. Some people stay with you for a season. Some may stay for a reason. And some teach you exactly who you do not want to become. More laughter followed. Not loud. Not cruel. But enough. Enough to reveal the target without saying her name. Madison lowered her eyes, hiding a smile behind her champagne glass. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Others seemed entertained. Ryan continued speaking, careful to remain just indirect enough to preserve the appearance of innocence. Yet everyone understood. Ava heard every word. She felt every glance. The room wanted a reaction. Embarrassment. Anger. Hate. Something. Instead, she simply lifted her water glass and took a small sip. Her expression never changed. Her posture never changed. Across the ballroom, Ryan noticed. The reaction he expected never arrived. For the first time that evening, uncertainty touched his face. Because humiliation only works when the target agrees to carry it. And Eva Brooks refused to carry anything he handed her. At that exact moment, near the entrance of the ballroom, several hotel staff members suddenly straightened their posture. A quiet ripple moved through security personnel. Heads turned toward the doors. Something was happening. Someone important had just arrived. The shift in the room was subtle at first. A few conversations stopped mid-sentence. Several guests turned toward the ballroom entrance. Members of the hotel staff suddenly appeared more attentive, their posture straighter, their movements more deliberate. Even the musicians seemed distracted for a moment. Ava noticed it immediately. So did Ryan. Standing near the center of the reception floor, Ryan followed the direction of everyone's attention. His expression changed the instant he recognized the man entering the room. Nathan Calpel. The name alone carried weight. Chairman of one of the largest investment groups in the country. Philanthropist. Industry leader. A man whose presence could alter business opportunities with a single meeting. Ryan had spent nearly a year trying to secure an introduction through mutual contacts. The invitation had been sent months ago more as a hopeful gesture than a realistic expectation. Nobody had believed Nathan would actually attend. Yet there he was. Calm. Composed. Walking through the ballroom with the quiet confidence of someone who never needed to announce his importance because everyone else already knew it. Whispers spread quickly through the crowd. Investors exchanged surprised looks. Several executives immediately moved toward the entrance hoping to greet him. Ryan himself stepped forward, a practiced smile returning to his face. This was unexpected, but potentially valuable. Very valuable. Madison adjusted her posture beside him. The evening suddenly felt much more important than a wedding reception. Nathan acknowledged a few greetings with polite nods but never stopped walking. His attention seemed focused elsewhere. Ryan extended a hand. Mr. Calpel. What an honor. Nathan shook it briefly. Professional. Courteous. Nothing more. Congratulations on your wedding, he said. Ryan's smile widened. Thank you. We are very grateful you could make it. For a moment, Ryan seemed certain the evening had turned in his favor. Then Nathan looked past him. Past Madison. Past the gathered executives and investors. His eyes settled on Eva. The change was immediate. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Simply unmistakable. Nathan began walking toward the back of the ballroom. Thou work here. Conversations faded as people watched. Ava remained seated, confused but calm. Nathan stopped beside her table. For several seconds neither spoke. Then he offered a small smile. Ms. Brooks. Ava stood slowly. Do I know you? Nathan studied her face as though confirming something he had waited years to see. Not personally, he replied. But my family has known your name for a very long time. The room grew quieter. Ryan's confidence began slipping beneath visible confusion. Ava glanced around the ballroom. Hundreds of eyes now focused on the exchange. I think there must be some mistake, she said gently. Nathan shook his head. There is no mistake. From inside his jacket, he removed a weathered photograph protected by a clear sleeve. He handed it to her carefully. Ava looked down. Her breath caught. The image showed a younger version of herself standing beside an older woman and a teenage boy outside a roadside motel during a snowstorm many years earlier. The memory returned instantly. The stranded vehicle. The freezing weather. The family she helped. Ava looked up in disbelief. Nathan nodded. The woman in that photograph was my mother. Silence settled across the ballroom. Not the silence of boredom. The silence of people realizing they had misunderstood something important. Raijan stared from across the room. No longer smiling. For the first time all evening, he was not the center of attention. And standing beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, Eva finally understood why every mysterious message had led her here. For several seconds, nobody moved. The ballroom seemed suspended between one moment and the next. Ava stared at the photograph in her hands while memories long buried beneath years of struggle returned with startling clarity. The snow. The disabled vehicle. The frightened teenager. The grateful woman. A simple act of kindness she had almost forgotten. Nathan Caldwell waited patiently, allowing recognition to settle naturally. Then he spoke. His voice carried easily through the silent room. My mother kept that photograph for more than 15 years. She never forgot the woman who stopped when everyone else kept driving. Ava looked up slowly. I never expected anything in return. Nathan smiled. That is exactly why she never stopped talking about you. Around them, guests listened without interruption. Raijan remained frozen near the center of the ballroom, his champagne glass untouched. The confidence that had defined his evening was gone. Nathan reached into a leather portfolio carried by one of his assistants and removed a folder. Not flashy. Not dramatic. Used a simple folder. He handed it to Eva. Several years ago, my mother asked me to help find you. By the time we located you, your life had already changed. We learned about the divorce. We learned about the difficulties that followed. We also learned that despite everything, you continued helping other people whenever you could. Ava opened the folder carefully. Inside were legal documents bearing multiple signatures and official seals. She read the first page once. Then again. Her eyes widened. Nathan continued speaking. A charitable trust was established in your name 3 years ago. It has grown significantly since then. Today, its value exceeds $20 million. A collective breath moved through the room. Shock spread across faces that only minutes earlier had viewed Eva through entirely different eyes. Some guests stared openly. Others looked down, embarrassed by their earlier assumptions. Madison's expression faltered. Raijan simply stood motionless. $20 million. The number echoed through the ballroom without anyone needing to repeat it. Ava slowly closed the folder. For a moment she said nothing. Nathan waited. The guests waited. Even the musicians remained silent. Finally, Eva lifted her eyes. You created this because of something I did during a snowstorm? Nathan shook his head gently. No. We created it because of the kind of person who would stop during a snowstorm. The room fell silent again. A different kind of silence now. Not curiosity. Respect. Nathan then asked the question that had brought everything to this moment. The trust belongs entirely to you. Have you decided what you want to do with it? Ava looked around the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers. Expensive dresses. Perfect centerpieces. Then she thought about the shelter where she slept. The women she met every morning. The families trying to rebuild their lives one day at a time. When she finally answered, her voice remained calm. I want to create housing programs for women experiencing homelessness. Places where people can start over with dignity. Several guests lowered their eyes. Some nodded quietly. Nathan smiled. Not because of the money. Because the answer confirmed everything his family had believed for years. A extended his hand. Ava accepted it. Not as a business transaction. As acknowledgement. Across the ballroom, Ryan stood surrounded by luxury, applause, and success, yet somehow smaller than he had all evening. Not because Ava had humiliated him. She never tried to. The difference was far more powerful. She had revealed who she was without attacking who he was. A few minutes later, Ava collected her coat and prepared to leave. She did not stay for attention. She did not stay for celebration. As she walked toward the ballroom doors, conversations parted naturally around her. People who had barely noticed her arrival now stepped aside with quiet respect. Near the exit, she paused briefly and looked back one final time. Not at Ryan. Not at Madison. Not at the crowd. At the life she no longer needed permission to move beyond. Then she walked into the night beneath the glow of city lights, carrying no bitterness, no revenge, and no need to prove anything further. She had not won him back. She had won herself.